Welcome back to The Doctor Is In with Dr. Nadia Saba. I'm Dana Swadan, Dr. Saba's producer. This episode is part of our What Plants Crave series, where Dr. Saba speaks with growers, researchers, and other experts in controlled environment agriculture to get their insights about the direction of the industry and, of course, what exactly it is that plants crave. Today, we're speaking to Michelle Hackett of Riverview Farms. Michelle is the president of the largest female minority owned cannabis company in the world that is fully vertically integrated, with 75% of the company's workforce being minority women. Riverview Farms was established in 2016 and is the first cannabis operation in the Salinas Valley to get the exemption to grow within Monterey County. This is part one of our conversation with Michelle. Tune in next week for part two.
Hi, I'm Dr. Nadia Saba, president of Dr. Greenhouse and host of The Doctor Is In. Welcome to our special series, What Plants Crave. Today's guest is Michelle Hackett, president of Riverview Farms, a cannabis operation in Salinas, or Monterey County, California. Hi, Michelle. It's so great to have you on What Plants Crave. I'm really excited to learn more about you, about growing up in Salinas Valley, and the quirks of growing cannabis in a greenhouse.
Yes, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here and to chat with you for a second time.
Awesome. So first, tell us a little bit about yourself and Riverview Farms. The first time I met you was at the cannabis conference back in August 2021, and I was so impressed with the insights that you had on the industry. And again, I'm just really excited to have you. So tell us more about how you got to where you are today.
So, as you've already said, my name is Michelle Hackett. I'm the president and one of the owners of Riverview Farms. Riverview Farms is a female-owned and operated cannabis cultivation site in Monterey County. We were the first cultivation site in Monterey County to get an exemption to grow cannabis back in 2016. The nurseries that we currently cultivate on have been in my family's, real estate Rolodex for over 20 years. So my grandfather purchased these flower nurseries back when, flower production was very prominent in the Salinas Valley. We decided to roll the dice and begin cannabis cultivation when it first started to become, a hot ticket item and topic. My dad is the founder of our company, and so I work alongside him. He's obviously my mentor in business, and we brought my sister along on board with us 2 years ago to take over the retail responsibilities from my plate. So we are a vertically integrated operator. So we control everything we do internally from seed to sale. So I like to see ourselves as kind of a unique company that we have our own nursery, our own veg space, obviously our own cultivation, our own distribution and sales force. So we are very unique. We're not using a third-party distributor for any of our sales. So we take that on ourselves. So we are truthfully seeing the product being grown and selling it ourselves all the way to the final retailer. So that's a little bit about our cannabis operation. We have 2 10-acre parcels adjacent to one another. We are technically in Salinas Valley, which is obviously the ag capital of the world. And, we're now one of the top 5, cash commodities for this area, which is huge to be finally seen as part of the ag community, because that's really where our roots are. I am not from a legacy grower family, but I am a legacy grower in terms of farming, commercial agriculture. So my grandfather and my father were in commercial agriculture their whole lives. And so this conversion or this switch over to cannabis, which I think we'll talk about a little bit later today, are actually very similar. So yeah, I've been born and raised here in the Salinas Valley. I was educated up at St. Mary's. I got a business degree. I started working in commodity agriculture in sales. That's kind of my passion. I've always liked building relationships and talking with people. And, I take it as a compliment, but I've been told, I can sell ice to an Eskimo. So I've always had a lot of fun on the sales side of things. And so I was working for a local grower shipper processor all the way up right until 2016. And my dad and I had a lunch date at Tarpey's one day, a local restaurant. And he said, I'd really like for you to quit your cushy job in produce and come join me in cannabis. And I haven't looked back. So that's like a quick route to how I got here.
But your dad actually is the one who wanted to take the leap into cannabis.
Yeah. So my dad has been an entrepreneur his entire life and has dabbled in many businesses, not just agriculture has been the primary, but, real estate and restaurants. And yes, we had these nurseries and we were actually approached by back then, a known name in cannabis cultivation that wanted to rent the properties, wanted to lease them. And they were offering a very high ticket, numbers that we had never seen here locally in terms of renting these spaces. I mean, these 10-acre parcels were seen almost useless, right? Because they were no longer cultivating flowers. So we thought, well, what do you want to do on the site that you're willing to pay us this high ticket number? And they said, oh, we want to grow cannabis. So my dad started looking into it, doing some research, talking to local attorneys, and got that exemption. And once we knew we were going to do it the right way, obviously, there was no turning back. We needed to build a business from the ground up. And so I was thrilled when he asked me to be a part of the project. And I was just excited to learn something new. Like I said, cannabis had not been something that I was exposed to at a young age. So it was really about learning a whole new industry and really submerging myself in building a business with my father.
That's amazing. And now you brought your sister along into the business. I mean, what's it like working side by side with your sister? I'll just say that I also work side by side with my sister. Our second year, I hired my sister Janan as our marketing director. So she was our marketing director for a year and really established, how we market ourselves and our, outreach presence. And so I'm curious, how's that been for you guys?
I love it. She's right down the hall from me in the sales office. And to be honest with you, as I grew in my role here at Riverview, tasks just kept piling on my plate and on my desk, and I wasn't able to succeed at everything. So having my sister join the team took a tremendous amount of work and pressure off of my plate. She's completely taken the retail and grown it 2-3 times what I was able to do when I was in her shoes. Running the retail division. But it's really fun to have a built-in confidant, friend, and sibling that, you can talk to about business. And I will say, we're each other's biggest cheerleaders. We want to see each other succeed. She came with me to the cannabis conference, to watch me. And that was a really exciting time for us, to see young women entrepreneurs, getting these opportunities are new to us, right? New to us all. So it's been really fun. And especially when we do travel for work for various events, Hall of Flowers, MJ BizCon, it's funny because if we're without one another, a lot of people sometimes ask, where's your sister? Where's your sister? Or even confuse the two of us at times. So
this one time my sister and I had a meeting and it was the first time they were meeting her. And I knew them pretty well. And we're sitting there at lunch and they're like, oh my God, there's like 2 of you. Guys like echo each other and finish each other's sentences. And there's just something so seamless. I found working with my sister. And, she also communicates in a similar way that I do, both writing and verbal. So I did, there was no training or like, no, write it like this or say it like this. She knew how to say it and what to say. So it made it so easy for me to like let her do that external outreach while I was focused more internally because she talked like me. We're each other's biggest fans, like you were saying. So, we're helping each other along the way. Plus, it's just fun to like be at home or out to dinner or whatever, and just conversations end up just streaming to the business, whether, like consciously you want it to or not. It's just the opportunity to brainstorm and come up with ideas outside of office walls, outside of the business. I found has been really beneficial to just my mental state and even to the growth of the company.
Absolutely. I mean, you think about, sometimes your best thinking happens after a glass of wine or a puff or two. So we always laugh because we call each other in the morning when we're getting ready to talk about what we have going on that day, or sometimes after dinner. And if something's popped into our mind, our brains are always thinking about the business.
Totally. tell me, okay, so you had these ornamental greenhouses already, nursery, as part of the real estate that you guys own, but you mentioned that the flowers weren't being actively produced when you started growing cannabis. Did you have to do a lot of retrofitting of that greenhouse or of those greenhouses to be able to grow cannabis?
Absolutely. So these structures that have been here for decades were old wooden rooms with old, thick plastic with no light exposure, no racking systems, none of the bells and whistles that we have now. But it was interesting because Monterey County would only allow you to grow if there were existing structures at the beginning. So they were not allowing or issuing any licenses to any new cultivators that wanted to come into this space unless there was an existing structure.
But did you have to keep those existing structures or just have already established that existing structures had been there?
So you had to have this existing structure there, but we did make several improvements to the old wooden Japanese style houses that were used for flower and nursery production. We still use them today as mother rooms and as vegetative rooms, but we did go ahead and put new and improved greenhouses for actual cannabis production. So we have, 4 large old wooden rooms that we've rewrapped in poly, that we've, made sure we can, leach the roofs, that we can pull the side curtains down, that we've added in racking, dosatrons, Hortimax systems, all the bells and whistles for nursery and vegetative space. And then we have 4 brand new kind of state-of-the-art greenhouses that are fairly new to the property within the last 5 years that we kind of built from the ground up with the help of our friends that are local Systems USA. We went for greenhouses that had a little bit more bells and whistles than some of those old and wooden rooms. So, having, acrylic roofing that allows 100% of that UV light into the greenhouses, having those high ceilings, putting in blackout curtains. So our new rooms is where we see, all of our actual flowering canopy come out. But the old rooms, people thought they would be no good, that we would have to just completely tear them down and they would serve no purpose. But that wasn't true. We were able to use them in our production, just not necessarily for cannabis production.
That's really smart how you did that, to, sort of your low risk plants, also ones that maybe don't need as tight of control to get to that final product, to use those existing structures and what you had available, and then go with something a little bit more high tech for what you do want better control over. Monterey County, the climate is perfect, right?
Yes.
It's a perfect sound. And when you talk about bells and whistles, if I'm thinking about the environment, because I am an HVAC engineer, so I think about environmental control a lot. Do you need, would you even consider air conditioning? Do you need much heating? Do you just use evaporative cooling? What kind of systems do you have on these greenhouses?
So it's much less than you would think. We're very minimalistic in terms of, we are always thinking about cost and always about producing the highest quality cannabis for the lowest price. So when I mean bells and whistles, I really actually don't mean much. We do have horizontal and vertical fans in all of the cultivation rooms. We do have heaters that are necessary to help us obviously balance, that humidity dependent on time of year. We did pay a little extra for that acrylite, that glaze that they put on top of roofing. But ultimately, all of our competitors around us are also lit up. They all have grow lights. We do not have grow lights in our rooms right now. We're relying 100% on natural sunlight because there is such a weight and price to get those power upgrades needed to do lighting in the rooms. So we have strategically held back in terms of putting in lighting. But, for us inside the greenhouses, the investments have been obviously the temperature control systems, making sure that we're able to monitor, the temperature, the humidity inside and outside of the greenhouse, 24/7. That's obviously a tool that our grower Sean and my dad Mike looks at, daily, to ensure, the success of the rooms and the plants. But
with the light, I mean, without supplemental lighting, again, we're in California, so we have lots of light. Though Salinas, you can get sort of that fog, right, in the early morning. But I mean, do you see a reduction in production this time of year, right now in January in the winter? Or are you doing other things to help boost production, or is it pretty consistent throughout the year?
Well, we do see, a reduced yield, obviously, this time of year due to the fact that we don't have that same consistent light. So, our winter months, we do see, less finished pounds per harvest. However, the quality is still, on par. We will see obviously a slightly smaller nug structure, but we still see, high quality THC, nice finished product. It's great for our jarrable brand as well as our bulk purchasers as well. But ultimately, during the summer, we have a higher yield, more production. We're able to turn the rooms faster as well. So we're getting, more back-to-back crops as opposed to winter. Sometimes these strains take longer than our, 8-week cycle that we like to stay on. But I will say the beginning of the year is always a really exciting time for us. That's when we normally like to bring out a new menu and new genetics. So it's kind of fun because we get to start to see these new strains come out for the first time, start to kind of R&D their THC, start to test them ourselves internally to see what we like. So the beginning of the year is always kind of an exciting time as well, even though we are seeing some low light. I mean, obviously with the California market right now, it's almost a blessing in disguise that we're seeing some lower yields, just due to the fact where the market has been, and I'm sure we'll go into that. But our number one concern is always fulfilling our 2 in-house brands, and then obviously servicing our regular bulk clientele as well.
What do you think is the biggest advantage that you have as a greenhouse grower over, say, a fully enclosed indoor facility, or even, some of the growers who are trying to go outdoors? What do you think? Where does greenhouses fit into that?
I think what is very underrated about greenhouse production is, one, its consistency, 365-day a year production. And just like, our agricultural friends that have lettuce available year round, that's who we are. That's who greenhouse production is able to do, large scale volume consistently 365 days a year. No other cultivator can do that. And I think it's finally starting to become recognized as, other brands and other farms have had these gaps starting to take place. Obviously outdoor cultivation is normally one crop a year, and indoor obviously varies, but I think the consistency and the quality of greenhouse that is offered 365 days a year is a huge selling point from a buyer standpoint. And then, above and beyond that, I don't mean to make like an inappropriate joke, but I really see greenhouse cannabis, and maybe I'm biased, as the premium. I know that indoor has always been seen as the premier cannabis, and there's absolutely no disrespect in my comment to indoor cultivators who have worked to make absolutely beautiful product. But I think of greenhouse product as real, as true to the time of year, to give you the absolute best tasting quality California cannabis that we can offer. And so I sometimes think of indoor cannabis as fake tits. They look great, it smells great, it's all perfect, but it's been modified to look like that, right? It's been modified, and the perception is unrealistic, right? It puts us in a tier of being less than or not as good, when ultimately it's different. They've modified everything about the atmosphere and the growing style. Whereas, greenhouse, you may see a slight deviation in product, dependent on the time of year in which you're purchasing it. But it's true to the natural sunlight and to the growing conditions and the appellation in which we're in. So I'm always going to be a greenhouse flower fan.
I think we just found the title to your podcast. I was going to ask a question. Now I totally forgot.
I'm sorry. I'm mom or dad, if you're listening, don't be upset.
No, it's great. What I wanted to ask is, at the retail level, is greenhouse priced more similar to indoor or outdoor, or do you have like a totally different tier?
We're a mid-shelf tier. So I think sometimes outdoor tries to kind of play at our level, But, obviously the indoor is always that premium shelf. That's always going to be, these very hyped up names, like obviously like a Wonder Bread or things like that. But greenhouse, we're a mid-tier, but I think if you were to look at the analytics that are out there, that's where the consumers are coming back and shopping. We liked our product to be on the shelf, anywhere between 25 and 30 bucks an eighth. And we want people to come in and be able to buy cannabis at a reasonable price. And that's what we do. So I would say it's just like purchasing alcohol. When people are going into the grocery store and doing their weekly shopping or monthly shopping, every week you're not able to buy, 1942 tequila or, Vouv or these fancy labels. Those are for a treat. That's for a special occasion. The average Joe goes in and buys Kendall Jackson or a 24 pack of Corona, or, that's what people can afford. That's your everyday use. And so we like to think ourselves as the everyday smoke.
I like that. Something that drives me crazy at the retail level at dispensaries is that most of them don't make it clear if this is coming from indoor, greenhouse, and outdoor. And I don't know, maybe there's some politics behind that, but coming from greenhouse myself, that's where my first love and all my research was done. I try to support the greenhouse growers, but even sometimes the labels on the jars don't even say if it was greenhouse, and then I think about one of your competitors that has a very clear name that I know is a greenhouse. And I'm like, why isn't it more out there? Why isn't it more prominent? Why do I just know this one label because it's clear they're a greenhouse company? Why don't I know that? You know what I'm trying to say?
Absolutely. I think, unfortunately, at least in California, I can't speak for the other markets. When people are going into the dispensary, and I see it a lot, and it is very frustrating also from the staff sometimes at the dispensary level, the conversation is all about THC. And yeah. There has been so much research that has finally come out that THC does not directly link to the quality high or how high you will get. And I can go on, and I'm in no way a scientist or anything like that. But I think the interesting point is, people are either shopping based off price or people are based off THC. And so, I would love to see more education at the store level and even, coming from, brands like us to educate them as to what the difference is amongst the tiers. And I think the best advocates we can be is for ourselves. That's what I have learned this past year through many different initiatives that we've been working on. But having that bud tender education, even on our website, we have a spot directly for bud tenders that are, new or want to learn about our brands. It's all about what we do. It's all about how we do things and how it's different than, other styles of production. So, that education piece, although it sometimes seems unnecessary, is very important at the store level, and on a broader scale, just so that people really know exactly what they're buying and aren't just buying based off of THC and thinking, okay, well, I'm going to buy this because it's the best bang for my buck. Sometimes that's not the case when you're shopping solely off of percentages.
I can't imagine going wine tasting and asking, what is the alcohol content of this Merlot?
Exactly.
It's never going to happen.
Shifting the mindset of, this, I really do think it's the store level, people that are working with the consumers, working with those bud tenders is so crucial, just so that they really do understand, that it's really, quality over, sometimes, quantity, or what I mean in quantity is really, like I said, the THC
content. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about, coming from agricultural mecca of Salinas Valley, which has been dubbed the salad bowl of the world. But, I don't know how many people realize that the majority of our lettuce and strawberries and so many of our ground crops come from Salinas, and just the perfect climate of why those crops come from there. But I'm curious. I have so many questions that I want to ask, because you grew up in this area. You weren't just transplanted sort of to this area. How has the cannabis industry been sort of received at large by the agricultural community there?
So that's a very loaded question, and I'll do my best to answer
I believe
that.
it.
So, you know, the Salinas Valley is a 90-mile stretch from the Pacific Ocean all the way into King City. And the Salinas Valley, like you said, produces 80 to 90% of the fresh vegetables that the US consumes today. So those major crops include head lettuce, artichokes, strawberries, and now cannabis. And so I will say there's been obviously positives and negatives, to this new and emerging industry in the Salinas Valley. But what I think the big disconnect is that they are so much more alike than people think. I think the assumption sometimes is if you come to these cannabis cultivation sites that everybody is just smoking out and that we're not running a real business. And so that's where my frustration sometimes gets created, especially when working on major issues with, local politicians, state level politicians, and really trying to affect positive change within our industry, which I'm very passionate about. What I think we need to understand is, cannabis is here to stay. So to have, a close working relationship with the local, agricultural fields, growers, shippers, as well as the community is extremely important and transparent relationship we have to have if this is going to be a successful program. And, ultimately, some of the things that have come up, recently, one being odor control, right? That's like a topic. And, we're really,
odor control, like the bane.
we're very unique. We're not Santa Barbara. We're not in a neighborhood. We're not, some of these other cultivation regions where you're directly side by side schools, homes. We're in ag land. This is farming land. And, we have had great relationships, which is to our advantage with local growers. For example, there's, fields right behind me, two large agricultural fields that produce lots of crops for all the local grower shippers. And for example, we've had issues when they're spraying oversight. That's how they spray, application of pest control management is through a helicopter because it's large acres. And, we've been able to call the ag commissioner, find out whose fields they are, work with them to make sure that if they could please notify us when they're spraying certain chemicals so that we close our ridge vents. And things like that have been great in terms of just communication and them being receptive to saying, yeah, no problem. This is our schedule for the next week so that we can control and we can work around.
I just want to say that I love that you brought this up because, I think one of the big arguments that people try to make against greenhouse, especially in an ag community like you're in, is the concern about pesticide drift. Right. And then, poor cannabis growers, right? You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. You can't have any pests and you can't have any pesticides. But, this concern, right? And it's a real concern. And I've made the comment, and I'm so glad you're validating this comment. I'm like, get to know your neighbors, like find out when they're going to spray. Like, don't be like a shut in and, and like pretend like you don't coexist with these other people. Talk to them. Find out, so that you can button things up when they're going to do it or ask them to do it on certain days, right? When you're not harvesting or something, like have a conversation.
And it's of course been to our advantage. And again, I think we're more comfortable doing it because that's where we've come from. Thankfully, my dad has so many, connections here locally that he's had, just very frank conversations on the phone, with growers he's known, his whole adult life. So we've been very fortunate on things like that. But circling back to like the odor control, it really should be complaint driven because we are not anywhere near homes and things of that nature. And, I get it. It's part of compliancy to put in these expensive systems and things of that nature. But what really boggles my brain sometimes is what is the difference between a cannabis cultivation site and an agricultural site when they're both doing the same things, but being treated very differently. And that's where my frustration lies. So it's like, have you ever smelled a disked field of broccoli? It is extremely,
a big fart.
Extremely pungent. Yeah. Not pleasant, gassy, farty smell that surrounds our whole valley. And it's part of living here in the Salinas Valley.
Why don't we put a big dome over Gilroy?
The garlic and, artichokes and wine grapes, every single process has also, the waste at the very end of your production. And, the way that cannabis has been treated, that, they want us to put these very costly, systems in place when we are in the middle of acres of farmland. It just doesn't make sense. So things like that do really boggle my mind, even on site visits. We've talked about, recently when we have inspections from the county, which was normally quarterly, that seems to have picked up for some weird reason to be more consistent, which, takes a full day of our time to walk these sites and stuff. Things that we use on a daily basis that sometimes inspectors spot, 3, 4, 5 years into us running these businesses. And they want us to go back and apply for a permit for something that's been on the property for 20 years. And we ask the question, well, do you go to the agricultural sites and request that they, submit a permit for a water tank that's been here for 20 years? And when their answer is no, that really creates frustration for me, because it has to, I understand, be governed differently, but the treatment from our local entities and state level entities need to be the same. If we are treating, this with respect and honesty and transparency by being licensed cultivators and having, these businesses, we have to have some dialogue and some open communication in terms of, it needs to be fair. What is done to our peers needs to be done to us, and vice versa. And sometimes we obviously don't see that treatment take place. So that's a whole another topic.
Yeah. Well, I mean, sort of along those same lines, but kind of from a different angle, I was shocked to find out a couple of weeks ago that the California Department of Ag doesn't report cannabis revenue for the state of California. And when I dug a little deeper, I found out that, well, they don't need to do it because cannabis isn't a federally legal crop. And so because they don't need to do it, they don't do it, even though in 2020 it was a $2.8 billion revenue crop, which puts it like in the top 5 or 10 of the entire state. It's like up there with almonds. And you're just like, you are missing, this is not the complete picture. Why are we not giving cannabis the credit it deserves, not just in terms of revenue, but in terms of the jobs it's creating, right? In terms of the tourism it might be creating. I mean, there's so much good wrapped in that number that it just seems so disingenuous that they're choosing to ignore it.
Absolutely. I mean, and just quickly to touch on one of the many things you brought up, but jobs, that's another key issue here in the Salinas Valley that I think is forgotten, that in large scale commodity agriculture, it is a 6-month workforce, meaning our crops are in the ground here in the Salinas Valley, normally from Easter to Thanksgiving. So it's a seasonal crop. So these families are used to uprooting their lives twice a year and going from Salinas, California to Yuma, Arizona and back. So think about people that have kids, think about people that have, responsibilities to, elderly, or, this is their home, to live and work here in the Salinas Valley and then to uproot to Yuma. Whereas cannabis cultivation, we're 365 days a year here in the Salinas Valley. And, I think that that's a huge oversight, and when we talk about taxation and all these other issues that affect our cannabis industry, we need to be seen as a same or like-minded player to the lettuce growers, the artichoke growers, the wine grape growers that are all here locally, because we are the only ones that are keeping them employed year round here in the Salinas Valley. Whereas if they're working for other commodity crops, they're moving up and down out of the state twice a year, which is taking all that money to another community every single time it's happening.
That is such an interesting thought. I guess I didn't realize it, but it makes perfect sense that, when we're not in lettuce season here, I mean, it's all winter lettuce down in Yuma. So for our listeners who don't know, Yuma is the other 90% of the lettuce that you're eating.
Yeah.
And, just all the implications about that in terms of having a home where you pay your taxes, your kids going to school, just all those things. I also think about, makes me think about field cannabis and, our friends up in the Emerald Triangle, that it is seasonal, right? It has been traditionally seasonal. And there's, this major migration to Northern California when they're harvesting and trimming. And then there's a big exodus after that happens. And so I see what you're doing, greenhouse and indoor, as flattening that curve and creating more stability for the community and the people in that community. I mean, that just makes so much sense.
And I think like what's really interesting is about our workforce is because they have worked in so many different, commodity crops, that it's so easy for them to cross-train into roles here in cannabis. And when you think about also the labor that is being asked of them in the fields versus at our cannabis production sites, it's all very valuable and hard work. And I don't think we give enough praise to our hardworking people that harvest our lettuce and harvest our strawberries. But I like to think that working here on our cannabis cultivation sites, yes, we work very hard and we transplant and we harvest and we buck and we trim and we thin and skim plants. But I do like to see greenhouse cultivation labor as slightly more enjoyable work. I don't know if I'm putting this correctly, but when you think about just the work it takes, if you've ever seen it done, I have many times. I've grown up seeing it my whole life. To be bent over harvesting lettuce.
Work. Literally, you are bent over and squatting for 10 hours a day, starting sometimes at 3 or 4 in the morning and ending at 3 in the afternoon. They definitely get a lot of praise from me. At his hard, fast work. Yeah.
So and I would like to say that, we have an incredible crew. We wouldn't be where we are without our team. And we like to have a lot of fun here. We work very hard, but we also play hard. We like to, celebrate everybody's wins together. And, whether it's a monthly barbecue or getting the taco truck, or, sometimes we get the mariachi bands out here, or, we like to have a lot of fun here at the workplace, and it makes it really enjoyable for all of us because, I recognize the faces out in the yard every day, vice versa. They all know who I am, who my family is. And I think that that's a really key component of running still a family owned and operated business. We've never taken on any outside investors, so it's still a family-run business. And so we're all very close-knit, which makes a great culture and community within our organization.
That's awesome. I want you to expand a little bit on the comment you made about hiring people who have come from traditional field agriculture and that they bring certain skills that make it easier to train. What are some of those skills?
I think one of the biggest advantages to understanding large-scale commodity agriculture and how it correlates to cannabis is understanding how to create a harvest schedule, the timing. People don't understand the planning it takes to put certain strains into production and how long we sometimes need to vet out these strains prior to just throwing them in. I don't know if you've heard this, but a year ago, our industry was hit very severely with hop latent viroid, which is still lingering today. And what that hop latent viroid is, and I don't want to take too much time on this, but it's a disease that affects the cannabis production plant. It lowers the yield, it lowers the THC, and it's not visible to the naked eye. So for example, when we've wanted to bring in new genetics or we've wanted to, change our menu, we've always been of the kind that, if we can ultimately start it from seed and breed it ourselves, that's what we'd like to do. However, sometimes there's that demand of these, hot names that we want to put into rotation faster. So in the past, we were all, purchasing clones from other farms throughout the state and not doing our due diligence to make sure that they were clean, safe cuts. So this viroid went around for over a year and it's still lingering today. And ultimately, there are third-party testing machines by Agdia that most of the large labs, Cannalysis Dark Heart had purchased so that they could do tissue cuttings, samples themselves. You could send them all your clones or tissue, samples from your clones to see if your plants were affected. Well, when you're running a 20-acre facility, the amount of samples that we would have to send into a lab is astronomical. So what did we do? We purchased 2 machines. We made the investment into our grow operation, and now we've created a best practice from this. So we have our head of, nursery that tests the mothers 3 times. We test every single round of cuttings to ensure that there's no way that that's possible, that it could come back into our facility. And so again, we're always thinking from an agricultural basis that if an issue hits this farm, or if there's something that happens, how can we positively affect a change so that it doesn't just consistently happen? There's a lot of equipment that we went out and sourced from agriculture that we retrofitted to make work in cannabis, such as our automatic potting machine or our sorting machine. People want to put these spin as if they're reinventing the wheel by selling you a cannabis product, but they're really just marking it up 3-4 times. But we don't need these new technologies because they're really not new. They've obviously been working and successful in other industries for years. And so I think that's also been a huge advantage. Is my dad is a tinkerer. He can fix anything. I mean, I never worry if we're together, yes, because he's my dad, but he's always been into boats and toys, cars, motorcycles. And so when we started this cannabis operation and thinking about efficiencies, I think where we really shined was if we had asked for a consultant to come in and give us a layout, a lot of operations, unfortunately, were taken advantage around us and thought, oh, they had to have these rotating tables and all these really fancy things, which are incredible if you have the money and the investment. But ultimately, that ends up just being very costly. You can actually make your facility up and running and functional fairly inexpensively if you know what to look for. And if you're always turning something old into something new. For example, like we had a bunch of excess rebar. We turned it into our racking system that we still use today that was, left over from the nursery production. So we're always kind of tinkering about, hey, can we use this again? Or can we recycle our water, which we do now? Can we recycle our soil? So I think having that ag background is, these growers here work on, 10 cents a carton. They're not these high margins. They're not making millions of dollars, but they have over time being smart and being just more methodical in how they spend their money than some of us in the cultivation world and some of us in the cannabis space. And so I think that is a huge advantage that we've had, is to be able to understand commodity ag and put those best practices into play here in cannabis.
Totally. I love that perspective. I mean, the first time I worked on a farm was a mushroom farm in Idaho. It was super cool. That's where I learned the value of getting up and starting working at 4 a.m. They would, the farm guys would be out at 4 a.m, and I lived on a little 20-foot trailer right on the farm. And the first couple of weeks I was so annoyed because they'd wake me up, and then I was like, screw it, I'm gonna get up and work with them. And I still get up super early every day. I mean, just it's so nice to watch the sunrise.
That concludes part 1 of our interview with Michelle Hackett of Riverview Farms. Tune in next week to hear part 2, where her and Dr. Saba continue their conversation. I'm Dana Swadan, and this has been The Doctor Is In with Dr. Nadia Saba. Thank you for listening.